PowerSteering software. We're very glad that you could join us today for our featured presentation, Lean Six Sigma Goes Global at Molex, featuring Mike Higgins. Just to cover a few logistical items, we will be recording this session and we'll be able to make the slides available to you very shortly after the session concludes. All phone lines have been muted during the presentation, but we do urge you to submit questions as they occur to you by using the Q&A panel at the right-hand side of your screen. We will address as many questions as we have time for, and anything that we don't get to, we'll handle offline. Just to quickly introduce you to PowerSteering software, we're the leading business-driven project and portfolio management software used by many clients that you see on this slide, and used in the areas of process improvement, innovation, project management offices, and other strategic projects. We're very flexible. Software is easy to use and is deployed without requiring any IT resources. And we have offices both in Cambridge and in London. And we really do feel very fortunate to have customers like Molex who are willing to share their deployment experience with other practitioners, and really appreciate Mike's time. In fact, our next webcast is scheduled for February 15th, and that features Poly 1. Let me just quickly introduce Mike, and then take it away. Mike has worked for Molex for 17 years, the first 13 of which were in new product development. In 2006, he was selected to be part of the company's inaugural wave of black belts, and he became a certified master black belt. Just last year, he was promoted to manager of the global Lean Six Sigma, and he's responsible for all Lean Six Sigma activities globally. So, Mike, please take it away.
Thank you, Linda. The agenda that I want to go over today is I'll give everyone a quick description about what Molex is, who we are, some of our products, and our business philosophies. Then we'll work into discuss how we deploy Lean Six Sigma in a global organization. And then finally, we'll show some of the PowerSteering tools and systems that we use to be able to manage deployment of this size. So who is Molex? Well, today we're a leader and an innovator in a $34 billion global interconnect marketplace. Of that, we have 8% share of the business, had $3 billion in global sales last year. As you can see then, we've got manufacturing and development centers in 16 different countries, and the totals of those are, over 60. Over 100,000 products, and then we have a dedicated team of 35,000 individuals. So you could imagine, as we talk later about the deployment of Lean Six Sigma, how Lean and Six Sigma are very important to us in terms of how we manage through and get the most efficiency of so many different moving parts. Really, we have one major goal, and that is that we have seen managing the deployment. As you could imagine, with 25 locations that we have, managing a deployment this size can be challenging. And one of the things that I'll start to show you in these next slides is really how we leverage PowerSteering to be able to help make the deployment itself lean. Obviously, we want to be able to practice what we preach and make sure that we're eliminating waste in our system. So one of the things that I try to always do is to encourage that any types of metrics or any types of work that we're doing is done within the PowerSteering system. And I'll explain why in a few seconds. As we talked about what we did differently, we invested heavily. And we realized that in order to be able to get the successes we needed to do some investment. So we invested in three major softwares. First was iGraphics. iGraphics is a process mapping software, which is important from everything if you're familiar with a SIPOC diagram or a value stream map, or even sometimes simple process maps. We realized that our belts would need to go through to be able to use this tool, and we have that software. We also invested in Minitab, obviously the statistical analysis software, as our green belts and black belts are going through to be able to analyze things statistically. We need to have a software for them. And then finally, as we'll expand a little bit further here in terms of PowerSteering, we realized we needed a data management system, a project management system in place to be able to handle our Lean Six Sigma deployment. And a couple things that we do from PowerSteering is that all of our project data is uploaded directly to PowerSteering. So when we talked about the 2,700 projects that we have, I know that because I can go into the PowerSteering system and be able to see that. We also handle all of our project approvals through the PowerSteering system. So our master black belts, our champions, our process owners are all engaged within this as well as the belts are. So as they are submitting the approval, it's all occurring within the system. As we go through and calculate the financial savings, those are all stored, approved by our financial representative, and then rolled up and reported through PowerSteering. And then lastly is what we started to evolve PowerSteering into was to allow it to become the library it is, and then use that library to be able to replicate some of those successes, the Just Do It projects that I referenced a few slides ago. Here's an example as we talked about a standard template, and I know this is a bit of an eye chart, but really what I wanted to do is show two things. One is we have standard templates for all of our work items, a Just Do It project, a Lean project, a Six Sigma project, that we have required deliverables that all our belts have to go through, making sure they update it. Our master black belts and champions will go through to verify that all these are sufficient to the project's needs before that approval goes through. That level of standardization is obviously important. As we talked about, we want to ensure the integrity of all projects across locations and countries as well. The item on the right shows you, once again, how we've translated it in Japanese, in this case, to make sure that our Japanese counterparts are able to have the system set up so it's flexible to their needs. So we've gone through and been able to, once again, standardize between geographies. Getting into managing a deployment, one of the things, if you're familiar with PowerSteering, this probably looks very familiar to you. If not, one of the things, let me explain this through here, is we use both portfolios and dashboards really to go through to manage what that deployment needs to be. So the portfolio over here is we'll set some items up, some standard things we want to look at. In this case, it's called black belt loading. So I want to look at the numbers we talked about. Each black belt should work on 3 to 4 projects a year. I can run those to see exactly what we have. In some cases, I might look at it from a geography or division. There's no limit to the number of portfolios you can set up. So then as we set up those portfolios and we bring those into the dashboard, what you can see here is I can get some quick indicators of the projects themselves. So in this case, in this column here, we have the progress indicator. We also can see the phase days and then the project days. So once again, I'll drop down to here and I can see in this case, this project is late, is indicated by the red indicator here. It would be green if it was on time. But more importantly, if I look at the phase days, it's 200 days late. So I could go in specifically to this project to understand why. We also have what's called a site deployment leader at each location. And each site deployment leader, once again, is going to have more detail about their own location, and they're using many of these same dashboards and portfolios. You can also look up here. We encourage people to go through and search other opportunities within the system. So basically anyone in Molex can go in and search a person or a project. As you can see, each one has a unique project ID. So if 3710 was a project that was meaningful to many people, they could go in and search 3710 to be able to find those projects. So we use dashboards quite a bit to be able to manage the deployment. This next slide shows how we use visual portals. Going back to what I had said earlier, what gets measured gets done. Visual portals are a way for us to quickly assess what the deployment or specific metric will be at any given time. Once again, if you look down here, this presentation was put together on 1/4, But if I went in the system and I updated this, I could see the up-to-the-minute information. So if someone had just made a change an hour ago, I'm sure many of these graphs probably in the span of 2 weeks are going to change. And once again, we can set anything that we want up to be measured based on entering the information in the details, in this case called tags. Once those tags have been edited and basically filled into the criteria that we need, we can go through and see many things versus on track, off track, the number of projects in the different phases, different parameters that are important to a site deployment leader, to a champion, maybe even to a belt themselves. So they have the ability to go through and set this information up. So it definitely is a way for us to go through and manage the system and get some meaningful information very quickly, because each one of these would be set up in the home page. And the other nice thing is maybe this slide in particular, this graph is important. All of this information is derived from a report. So what we can do is we can set up automated reports in the system so that on a weekly basis, daily basis, monthly basis, I can get this information sent directly to my email address when it's going to go through, filter through the system, send the most detailed information. Did you hear me talk a lot about replication in the Just Do It project? One of the things that as we've evolved within our deployment is we realized very quickly that we have a lot of meaningful information and a lot of good data within our system. How we go about getting that data and making sure that we're replicating the successes, making sure that a project pipeline in one location is starting to incorporate some of the successes of the other ones. We use PowerSteering to be able to go through and filter through that information to generate some of the reports. Upper management has actually challenged the local management of the areas to go through and find some of those projects to replicate. And let me just show you briefly here in terms of what this would do. Once again, this is a bit of an eye chart, but what we can do is you can see the functional areas. We have in here several different areas in terms of as we start a project, what is important to that project. So maybe I wanted to look at all plating projects down here. I could go in, select plating projects, and look for all plating projects. Maybe I wanted to filter it down a little bit more. I could look at maybe specifically Six Sigma projects, in this case DMAIC projects. We could be able to find that. I could filter it by even time frame or by owner. So we've got the ability to go through and kind of run some of these reports to be able to see where some of those best successes are. This next slide, I just want to briefly talk about how we also started to use PowerSteering for other applications outside of Global Lean Six Sigma. And this is actually a project that I was working on. It was within one of my black belt projects, and we quickly realized that we didn't have a efficient way to set things up. So this was actually a tooling transfer project that we went through, and what we did is we set up our own gated system, a simple 4-gated system that was able to handle this as a workflow. So as I verified the part, maybe it could be sent over to someone else, and as they've gone through and they've completed it, they would pass the ownership. So really, really quickly, you could see the number of projects that we've had here. Anyone could see exactly where project 45 was in any given location. It's on time versus over here, project 16 was running late to what we needed to do. So maybe project 16 was important to me as I'm looking through this executive review. I could click on that, get the detailed information to understand why. Also along the lines, you've probably heard me talk about this several times now, what gets measured gets done. We basically went through and did an automated report because we found out that very quickly that this area, this disposition, so as a product engineer would go through and had a certain amount of time to make a decision on a tool if it was good or not, started falling back very quickly. In this case, you can see this particular engineer had 25 projects at this point. When we first had it, about 80 to 90% of them were late. So what we did is within the system itself, we actually set up an automated report that went out to the entire engineering community. And what we found was that the engineers, at this case, for whatever reason, or just had a lot to do, couldn't put the focused effort on it. Once this report was being sent out on a weekly basis, very quickly, instead of 80% of them being late, they were dispositioned on time and the projects were working their way to where they needed to be. So once again, it was just a really good use of the system to be able to get some timely execution that we needed.